all of us be very, very worried when society starts to police thought. And that, of course, is what Stalin did and what Hitler did. So they were in the business of controlling people to the extent of actually imprisoning them, killing them, because of what they thought. Faith at its worst can do that. Faith at its best obviously can't. There is a sense in which the sort of rational discussing way of doing things, which is what we've been doing this morning, is, I believe, antithetical to faith, but is the kind of thing, and the faith that I believe it's antithetical to was the kind of thing that Stalin would have understood. Not that he was religious, but, or perhaps his early training as a seminarian might have given him the idea that controlling thought was the right kind of thing to do. And I think we should simply agree that thought police, in all that that implies, is deeply evil and deeply wicked and can have terrible consequences. And what we must try and do is to enter into reasoned discussion together.
Yeah, I'll buy that.
Good. So now, these two other things are science and faith. Atheism has had its day. I do think that would be an important thing to say.
Okay.
And now I want to ask Richard a question.
Yes,
yeah,
of course.
okay. See, the thing about science and faith being that I can only go all that stuff about God being too complex and things. That's where I would come from.
I won't go over that in detail. I'd just like to, I really, just as a question from you and a quick answer as a way into that other discussion.
Okay.
That other discussion kind of came out quite in quite a loose way.
Okay.
Editing-wise, I need something that's quite punchy.
Okay.
You want something punchy?
Yeah.
Okay. Soundbite, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Bit of boom show in the back there. Okay, that's fine. Okay, and action.
Do you think science and faith are incompatible?
No, and I think the history of the whole interaction of science and religion shows that this idea there's perpetual warfare between them is simply historically unjustified. What you can show is at times they are in conflict and at times they work quite well together. And it seems to me that there's an obligation on all of us to try and make sure that they work together well in the future, as at times they have done in the past.
You've written that atheism is in decline, is in twilight. What do you mean by that? Why do you think that?
When I was researching a book called The Twilight of Atheism, one of the things I noticed is that its appeal is shaped largely by cultural factors. Where belief in God is seen to be a bad thing, atheism begins to flourish. We seem to be entering a phase in Western culture where that core belief seems to be eroded. There's a new interest in postmodern culture about spirituality. And what I see happening, and I don't say this makes it right or anything like that, what I see happening is people beginning to talk instead about spirituality instead of atheism. It's particularly evident amongst younger people, and that made me wonder, amongst many other things, whether atheism actually was beginning to lose the appeal it once had in a more modernist culture.
What about the sort of spiritual atheist, if I could coin that phrase, somebody like Einstein, who was a deeply spiritual man, but who didn't actually believe in a supernatural God?
Well, it's a very interesting debate we could have about whether Einstein actually was an atheist. Certainly, he was not a conventional theist, but I think I would want to raise questions about whether he could be said to be an atheist as a result. But that example aside, I think I can certainly agree that there are many atheists who feel that it is natural or proper for human beings to explore a more spiritual side. I have no difficulty with that. But it seems to me there is an inconsistency there between a fundamentally atheist viewpoint, particularly a Marxist viewpoint which stresses the material side of life, and this growing interest in the spiritual side of things which we're seeing all around us.
I would call myself a spiritual atheist in that I do not believe in anything supernatural, but I have a deep reverence and wonder at the mysteries of the universe and a desire to understand them, while at the same time feeling that supernatural explanations for them are never going to be helpful.
I think we have a very interesting disagreement then on what the word spiritual means, because certainly I know many atheists like you who will talk about a sense of awe in the presence of nature. Others would say, no, it is more than just a human response to nature. There is something there which is eliciting a response, and they will use the language of spirituality or the spiritual to actually mean something that is not simply in nature, but actually goes beyond it, even though they wouldn't use traditional Christian language at all to refer to it. I find that development very interesting. I'm not sure where it's going to take us.
Thank you.
Just one question for Richard, and if I just phrase it to him, and then we'll see where we go. I've enjoyed reading your writings very much, and one of the things I've noticed is that in your writings we have what we might call a double critique of religion. There is a sort of intellectual critique. In your view, the religions do not have adequate evidential foundations. But alongside that, I occasionally detect flashes of anger, that this is something that is bad, that is evil. The world would be a better place if things were to change. And so I suppose my question really is this: why the anger? What is it that really makes you cross about the way religious people think or behave?
I think two possible answers to that. One would be relating to the evidential point. First, I think that religion teaches people to stop questioning. I'm sure you disagree with that, but the way I see it, it is such a privilege to be born at all. It's a very improbable event that either of us were born. We have the privilege of being in this universe for a few decades, and during that time it is an enormous privilege to be able to understand something about the universe in which we live, why we're here, why we were ever born, where we come from. And I think that is such a wonderful thing to be able to do that I am hostile, I can get angry about competing accounts which seem to me to not encourage that kind of questioning, but instead to say, this is how it is, it's all written in the Holy Book, it was written 2,000 years ago, and that's the end of it. I think that deprives people. I think that is such a belittling, a demeaning view of the universe, and I think it's tragic that children are brought up with that when they could be brought up in a more open-minded way. So that's one reason for the anger. The other reason we've touched upon, it is that I do think that faith, unsupported by evidence, is a lethal weapon. Doesn't have to be, of course it doesn't have to be, but it can be. It's a weapon because possibly unscrupulous people can get hold of often young men and use them as weapons, use them as human bombs. And the only reason they can be deployed as human bombs is that they have been brought up from childhood onwards to believe implicitly, without question, that whatever the particular religion is, the details don't matter. The point is that they do believe that it is the will of God that they should detonate themselves and blow up a busload of people or blow up a skyscraper in New York. I don't think that any kind of reasoned argument would do that to people. And so I believe that religious faith is an enormously powerful psychological weapon. It isn't always used for the bad, of course, but the fact that it can be used for the bad makes me want to cut it off at the roots, and at very least to stop the inculcation into children of the idea that there is something virtuous in faith. I am very concerned, I suppose we could call this a third reason for hostility, I'm very concerned with the way children coming into the world, innocent and knowing nothing, are taken over by the religion of whatever culture they happen to be born into. It doesn't happen to everybody, but it's very common. And so you see children being labelled in Northern Ireland. This is a Catholic child, this is a Protestant child, with all that that implies in the really appalling cultural circumstances due to the history of Northern Ireland. I would much rather say this is a child. Perhaps you could say this is a child of Catholic parents, or this is a child of Protestant parents, but to tie a label around a tiny child, this is a Catholic child, when the child is clearly too young to know what it thinks about the transubstantiation, or whatever it is that differentiates Catholics from Protestants. And it's no argument to say in reply that the conflict in Northern Ireland is all about politics and historical grievances. Of course it is. But the labelling of children, generation after generation after generation, down the generations, only exacerbates the problem and is bound to do so.
I'm happy with that.